welcome to another episode of the Legacy Warriors podcast. I am your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMA LOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, which is exactly how I uncovered as much as I did on these fighters I'm about to break down for you guys on this LFA card. We cover over 19 different promotions from all over the world, slowly creeping up to that 5,000 fighter profile mark. So if you want to check it out yourself, there's a 7-day free trial. Check the link in the description below and find out why we have over 110 subscribers on this service, making sure they have as many direct links to past fights for all these competitors. Make sure you guys check it out. MMA Fight Archive, link in the description below. All right. For this second episode of the Legacy Warriors podcast, we're going to be going with another LFA card as they celebrate their bicentennial event, LFA 200, going down in Minnesota, and they have a triple headliner with title fights sprinkled all around and the usual suspects that you come to know whenever the LFA touches down in Minnesota at the Mystic Lake Casino and Resort, I believe is the name of the venue. In the main event, we got the 145-pound title on the line. I believe it is a unification bout as champion Elijah Johns looks to unify the titles, going up against interim champion Lerryan Douglas. In the co-main event, we got another unification bout with the flyweight title, women's flyweight title on the line, as Shannon Clark looks to bounce back after losing out on her Dana White Contender Series opportunity a couple months ago, looking to unify the title against interim champion Cheyenne Bowers. And then the third title fight up is going to be in the welterweight division, as we have, not undisputed, I guess, the actual welterweight champion Vanilto Antunes, also coming up short on the Contender Series this past season, looking to unify the titles against interim champion and former Ultimate Fighter contestants Shamid Khan, Magomedov. Great triple serving there, like I said, for these title fights. So should be a fun night there. And then a bunch of other interesting prospects on the card, including Joy Hart, who came up short by split decision on the Contender Series. We got Alvin Hines, who's always a fun heavyweight watch. Ethan Ewing, who's a very underrated prospect that not a lot of people are talking about. Stephen Asplund as well. Kelton Sneve as well. Again, a ton of other great prospects on this card. I love breaking down the LFA cards. And now with the Legacy Warriors podcast, breaking down these cards for you every time they have an event, as well as Cage Warriors, which will be starting their 2025 schedule in March, I believe, with 3 events. So make sure you guys stay tuned when I drop those breakdowns as well. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the first episode that I had for LFA 199 a couple weeks back, but we are back, video and all, got a little bit of the graphics going too for you guys, and hopefully you guys are able to enjoy this LFA 200 breakdown. A reminder, there are official plays for this card that I've already dropped on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. You can find that in the link in the description below. Otherwise, see if you can decipher which spots I'm actually shooting on and which spots I'm looking to pass on. I make it pretty clear in the podcast, so just take a listen and you guys can take take what you want from that. Also, a reminder, there are 3 MMA events going down on Saturday on top of this LFA 200 card. We have the PFL Road to Dubai card starting at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I've already broken that down earlier this week, so make sure you guys check that out on the YouTube page. Otherwise, I also have KSW 102 breakdowns strictly in written form on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Got track plays for that for you guys as well. So, although there is no UFC, there is still a ton of other MMA for you guys to digest, so make sure you guys tune in and check it all out, whether it's on the Lock of the Night Patreon page or on the YouTube channel right here. All right, without further ado, let's get right into this card. 12 fights to cover. There are 14 fights in total, but 2 of them are amateur fights, and we don't have odds for them, so why even bother breaking those fights down? Let's get right into the pro fights here. First one up, we got Felipe Martinez Donis coming in at plus 170, going up against Alex Coover, who comes in at minus 210. Now, Donis, not a fighter that I'm all that high on. He seems to have all the basics of mixed martial arts under his belt, but very average to below average fighter. here. Doesn't really look like he took the preparation for this fight all that seriously either. Doesn't look in the greatest of shape based on the weigh-ins that I was able to see. Again, decent striking, decent grappling, but he can be grinded out. He can be outstruck. He can be out grappled, just as we saw in his last fight against Santos Verdinez. He's going up against Alex Coover, who outside of his last win, which was against a 5-0 opponent, he's pretty much been a bit of a can crusher. The combined record of his opponents that he's defeated at the time of fighting them, again, besides the 5-0 opponent he just beat, was 26-63. Going out there and doing what he should do against these guys, but he does have a loss to a 1-3 opponent earlier on in his career. He's clearly gotten better, training out of Iowa, training alongside the likes of Ricky Glenn and Johnny Case, former UFC fighters there. Seems to have the basics down as well, has some good pop on his shots, just as he showed in his last fight where he was able to knock his opponents out, but he also has some decent grappling up his sleeve if he needs to. At minus 210, I think it's a little bit wide here, but I do feel he is, Coover, that is, should be the one dictating the pace in this matchup. I think you'll be able to get off on better offense. I think you'll be able to stop any of the grappling approach that Donis might look to take here, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Coover be the one to implement the grappling approach. So I do like Coover, line a little bit wide here, but I believe Coover wins this fight and ends up grinding this matchup out. Next up, Cannon Swanson coming in at minus 1,200, going up against Jake Bauer coming in at plus 750. No need to get too deep into this one. I do not ever suggest betting anything over, minus 700 even, let alone minus 1,200 here. Swanson, solid grappler, came up short in his last LFA matchup by getting knocked out quickly by a knockout artist, but managed to bounce back in his next matchup on the regional scene, 44-second knockout via knee. Usually a grappler, a guy that looks to take opponents to the ground and utilize a slick array of submissions that he has up his sleeve. And I think he'll be able to do that here against a guy in Jack Bauer, who is a BJJ guy as well, but not all that great. He even has his first ever professional loss was due to timidity. And you see the guys that he's going up against after that, much older guys, 40-year-olds that he's able to defeat. Otherwise, he's going out there and getting pretty much smashed by these other guys. And I'm expecting Swanson to do the same thing here. If there was an under, I'd probably take the under. But obviously for the prelims, LFA or odds makers don't normally drop totals. So again, I'm picking Swanson, but minus 1,200. I would never recommend parlaying that spot either. But I think Swanson wins first round submission or first round TKO. Next up, the fight I'm probably most intrigued about on this entire undercard. We got Kelton Sneve coming in at minus 110, going up against Steve Collins, who comes in at minus 110. We got a pick 'em fight on our hands here. With Sneve, he's 3-0 as a pro. He was actually scheduled to fight Collins back in September. I'm not entirely sure what called an end to that fight, or at least the scheduling of that fight, but they're going to be throwing down this weekend regardless. Sneve normally looks to go out there and utilize his grappling approach, drowning opponents with his top pressure, good transitioning to better positions, getting good dominant positions, and he can go the full 15 minutes if he needs to. Last time out, he went up against another grappler, but we know what that usually means. Guys who go up against fellow grapplers often go out there and have to strike, and that's what Sneve was forced to do, and he looked damn good doing so. He swept Damian Trotter on the scorecards, even getting a 30-26 on one of the judges' scorecards. Looked really good, utilizing pressure, pace, forward movement, nasty array of combinations as well. He looked damn good. He trains out of Thunder Bay, Ontario, which is not known as much of an MMA hotbed. He has been cross-training down there in Minnesota along the likes of Thomas Peterson and Alvin Hines, who also trains on this card or fights on this card. Stephen Asplund, who also fights on this card as well. Kind of weird because those guys are heavyweights, light heavyweights, whereas Sneve is, much lower on the, I believe he's 25 or 35. Let me just quickly remind myself. 55. I knew he was smaller. But yeah, much smaller than those heavyweight guys, but probably still getting in some good rounds with them. Steve Collins, identical 3-0 record, came onto the radar of a lot of hardcore MMA fans when he defeated the son of Quentin Rampage Jackson, Raja Jackson, I believe his name was. We saw Raja land a big shot on Collins in the opening seconds of that fight, but from then on, Collins was able to reverse the momentum and really get to his grind game. He loves tying up in the clinch, pushing his opponents up against the cage, looking for takedowns and trying to rough them up there. That's how he was able to win his next matchup. And then last time around, we saw him defeat a short notice opponent that stepped in for Kelton Sneve in September on the LFA card, and he was able to finish him halfway through that first round. Collins has some decent striking, some good power, obviously some solid athleticism, but I believe Sneve is the slightly better fighter here in terms of getting the positions that he needs in the grappling to really pull away with this matchup. We have seen Collins start to slow down later on in fights, whereas Sneve looks like he has great cardio and should be able to implement his style. This is a close fight, as the odds obviously indicate here, and I think it's going to tell us a lot about both guys. And so I'm going to have to pass on this matchup, but I have to go with the Canadian, not because I am Canadian myself, but I believe he has a little bit wider of a skill set, and if he can overcome a little bit of athleticism advantage that Collins will have, and if he can stay safe in the striking realm early, look for Sneve to grind this fight out and possibly drown Collins in deep waters and win this fight on the scorecards. Next up, Jeremy Strobel Jr. coming in at plus 200, going up against Shad Walters, who comes in at minus 260. Now, starting off on the Strobel side, who trains out of Rufus Sport, alongside the likes of Christian Rodriguez and Anthony Pettis when he still trains Sergio Pettis, the guys that you would normally expect out of that Milwaukee-based camp. Showcased solid grappling through his last two matchups. Does a great job in terms of chaining his takedowns together. Has some decent striking, although I think grappling is probably where he feels most comfortable. And Anthony Pettis has been talking this guy up, saying that he is a very solid prospect to keep an eye on. I'm not the most impressed with his striking, as that's kind of what got him in trouble last time around. But luckily, he's still able to pull out the split decision victory over his opponent. The fight IQ is there. You know, the improvements are coming. The grappling, very solid as well. His ability to get his opponents back and find the control time that he needs to either win the rounds or eventually sink in and choke. Very impressive. And he goes up against another guy in Shad Walters who's quite impressive, who went 4-4 as an amateur, but now is 4-0 as a professional. All four of those fights coming in the LFA, and all four of those wins by finish. Last time around, we saw him utilize a beautiful guillotine choke to submit a guy that was a little bit too desperate to get the takedowns and left his neck out there for Walters to take advantage of. Prior to that, Walters was able to quickly knock out his opponent 11 seconds into their matchup, as it seems like his opponent was just a little bit too lackadaisical in the starting, allowing Walters to take full advantage of that. Walters is a very solid striker who throws in good combinations, and his defensive grappling is clearly improving, as that was kind of the issues that he had on the amateur scene that a lot of fighters were looking to expose. This is a very fun fight, but I have to lean ever so slightly to Strobel. I think his defensive striking will start to improve, obviously, with the training at Rufus Sport, but I think his ability to chain takedown attempts and really shut down Walters up against the cage will allow him to grind this fight out. Obviously, things will get a little bit sticky if he's forced to strike with Walters for a prolonged period of time, but considering the odds at plus 200 for Strobel Jr., I think he's worth a little bit of a shot. It's going to be sweaty, and again, not a boatload of confidence here, but if Strobel can get to his grappling, he might be able to expose the flaws that still might be remaining in Walters' game. So I'm going to have to go with Strobel here, and Strobel by decision. Next up, we move over to the heavyweight division where we have Stephen Asplund coming in at minus 350, going up against Hammer Morton, who comes in at plus 275. Now, last time around, Asplund suffered his first professional loss and first MMA loss, period, because he was undefeated as an amateur, ended up going into the pro ranks, and I believe he put together a 3-0 record. 3-0 or 4-0 record. Sorry, let me just quickly dust up on that. 3-0 record. Some solid finishes there as well, showcasing he can go 15 minutes like he did against Larry Gonzalez, utilizing a very solid striking approach, but also mixing it up in the grappling if you need to. Then he ran into Denzel Freeman. I believe that fight was back in September, where Freeland, very underrated heavyweight that not a lot of people are talking about due to his inactivity, although he will be fighting for the LFA heavyweight title at LFA 204, so he's definitely up there and possibly breaking through to the next level if he can win the title. So it may not be too bad of a loss on Asplund's record when all is said and done. I do believe Asplund is one of the brighter heavyweight prospects on the regional scene, which is usually a very shallow division to begin with, right? Especially in the UFC ranking system. Once you get past the number 5, number 6 guy, it really starts to drop off after that. And the same can be said on the regional scene. But Asplund showcases some solid striking, good combination striking, good footwork, good cardio. His grappling obviously needs a little bit of work, as we saw with Freeman, but I think Freeman just had an athleticism and strength advantage over Asplund that he was not able to match. Asplund trains alongside Thomas Peterson, Alvin Hines, as I mentioned before, like when I talked about Kelton Sneve. And he still has the youth that he could potentially take this thing to the next level if he learns from the mistakes that he made in his last fight. He's going up against Hammer Morton, who I initially thought was a guy that the LFA was bringing in just to do a job and allow Asplund to pick up a win and get back into the win column in front of his home crowd. But Morton's not a completely horrible heavyweight. He has some decent power in his hands, but he often looks to take fights to the ground and grind opponents out from there. He trains out of Colorado alongside Bellator veteran Brandon Gertz, and they seem to try to provide some process to his madness when he gets inside the cage. A lot of takedowns, a lot of top pressure, a couple of submissions as well for a guy his size. Not something you usually expect. But in the striking realm, he really needs to tighten it up a bit, as that's where he ended up coming up short in his lone professional loss. Might have some durability issues, but for the most part, he's not a complete pushover that, a minus 350 on Asplund would make you want to go bet on Asplund or parlay him and have a ton of confidence. I believe Asplund is the better fighter here. I think he is more skilled, but Morton's grappling and size advantage could potentially come into play here, and that could put Asplund back into some trouble, just as he had in the Freeman fight. With that said, I don't think Morton is as skilled as Freeman, and I don't think he can utilize his grappling as effectively as Freeman did, which is why I believe Asplund will be able to work out of those bad spots, get to his striking advantage, really wear on Morton, and eventually finish him in the second or third round. But again, minus 350, a little bit too wide for my liking. All right, next up, I believe this is the prelim headliner, as we have Santos Verdinez coming in at plus 155, going up against Ethan Ewing, who comes in at minus 185. Now, starting off on the Verdinez side, who is riding a 4-fight winning streak. He is undefeated when fighting for the LFA, as he bolsters a 4-0 record under that promotion. It's obvious he prefers the grappling realm, as he looks to take opponents to the ground almost immediately, and then from there looking for submissions or solid control, which seems to fall off later on in matchups. He does have a heel hook victory under his belt. I believe that was over Donis, who we spoke about in the first fight of the night. Very strong, trains out of Minnesota, out of Start BJJ, and often looks to take opponents down and grind them out from there. Striking, a lot of power shots, no real process to how he looks to land his damage or his combinations. It's all about getting fights to the ground and try to grind opponents out from there. He turned 30 back in December and has a decent streak coming into this weekend's fight. It'll be interesting to see if he can keep this run rolling that he's currently on. He's going up against Ethan Ewing, who trains out of CSW out of there in California, alongside former LFA title challenger Javier Garcia, not to mention of other great group of regional fighters training out of there who mostly fight for the LFA when they come over to California. He's riding a 6-fight winning streak, dropped his first 2 fights, the first of which was to former tough contestant Coover Jr., who just had a tremendous wrestling game, and then he lost his following matchup to Roberto Hernandez, who was able to get a heel hook on him after a weird transition. But it's clear Ewing has worked on all parts of his game, looking to really just cover up the flaw of his defensive grappling, which we've been seeing in spades over his last 6 matchups, shutting down the takedown attempts of his opponents and then applying pressure and utilizing combination striking to pick his opponents apart. He's very fun to watch, especially when he keeps his foot on the gas, and he's pretty much drowned all of his opponents in deep waters, finishing them in the second and third rounds. I don't think this prospect is getting enough talk or enough hype, and I believe this weekend will be an opportunity for him to splash on a lot of people's radars, especially with him coming into the LFA and potentially being able to put on a very good performance here. I believe Verdinez might be able to land a takedown or 2 here, but I think for the most part we'll see Ewing do a good job in terms of shutting down most of the offense that we'll see from Verdinez. From there, I think Ewing will be able to keep this fight upright for the second and third rounds and batter Verdinez on the feet, maybe even finding a finish later on in this matchup, but I believe that first round will be close. After that, Ewing should start to cruise here, shutting down the takedowns and getting to a striking advantage. Give me Ewing, and I'm going to Ewing third round finish, but again, props don't really matter, especially on the prelims for a card like LFA, as odds makers do not drop those props. All right. First fight on the main card, heavyweights, Alvin Hines coming in at minus 1,300, going up against Mark Currier, who comes in at plus 775. Now, Alvin Hines, he's up there in age. I believe he's 33 years old. Undefeated pro record. The guy looks like he's on a solid stack, if you know what I'm talking about. Throws big power in his shots, but often looks to take opponents to the ground, smash them from that top position by either finding a submission or looking for ground and pound. He doesn't mind mixing it up. His durability has helped him out, even with some of the robotic striking we've seen from him in the past, and that's allowed him to put on some very fun fights. Not to mention his last fight that he had. I can't recall the opponent's name, but it was a very fun fight, back and forth fight, but Hines was able to eventually get the finish there. Currier, low-level heavyweight, very, out of shape, likes to slug it out a little bit, has some decent experience under his belt for, relatively speaking, for regional heavyweights. But again, I'd be surprised if Hines slips up here. I do like the under on 1.5 at anything better than -150. I think Hines will have a clear strength advantage. I think he'll have no problem getting Currier to the ground, and from there, I think he'll get some sort of arm lock submission. I think Currier would struggle dealing with the strength and the just overall muscling of Hines, especially with the way that Hines fights. Again, -1,300, unbettable. I would never recommend betting a line like that, but I believe that Hines wins this fight, and I think it happens under 1.5. And if you have any action on this matchup, it would be with the under 1.5, in my opinion. All right, next up, Canadian Devin Lozej coming in at -300, going up against Enrique Pacheco Parra, who comes in at +250. Now, something to note, Parra came in 5 pounds overweight, and they readjusted this to a 130-pound catch weight after their initially agreed upon flyweight matchup. Something to keep in mind there. Now, Lozej originally trained alongside Kelton Sneve up there in Thunder Bay, Ontario, but had started cross-training with Team Alpha Male in Sacramento, and it seems like he's fully set up shop at Alpha Male, and that's a great thing for him to do at this weight class, and given the style that he normally brings to the table. This guy does a great job in terms of just smothering opponents against the cage, dragging them to the ground, showing great scrambling ability from that top position and good damage as well. Maybe not the most entertaining, but still very effective with how he does his work. Last time around, he was able to get a victory over former LFA title challenger Nate Smith, who's a BJJ black belt, and he shut him down completely. Rode top position for about 14 minutes out of the 15 minutes that they shared the cage, and that just goes to show what kind of control we should expect from him. He's going up against Enrique Pacheco Parra, who comes in with an 8-1 record and rides a 2-fight winning streak. He's had he fought this opponent, Alfredo Moed. He's fought him 3 times. Once as an amateur, where he defeated him, and then twice as a pro, where he defeated him in the first fight, and then in the second fight as a pro, was winning for about 3.5 rounds, but before it seemed like he was slowing down, and then his opponent was able to overwhelm him with a barrage of strikes and get him out of there. Parra, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu player, likes to take opponents to the ground, utilize a slick submission approach. His last 3 wins are all by guillotine, often looking to utilize that approach to get his opponents out of there. But he likes to wear on them against the cage in the clinch, looks to drag them to the ground, and from there try to get to his grappling game. But I think he's going to struggle to do that here against Lozej, who I think has good enough scrambling, good enough submission defense, and training with the guys at Team Alpha Male, they'll have him ready for any type of guillotine attempt that his opponent throws at him. As long as he doesn't get clipped or club and subbed, I think Lozej should do a good enough job in terms of controlling this fight, dictating the pace of it. And with Parra missing weight as badly as he did, maybe he starts to slow down and Lozej is able to pick up steam later on in this matchup. But look for Lozej to wear him out, wear him down, and eventually grind this fight out and win it on the scorecards or get a late finish here. The over 2.5 is a little bit chalked, but I do end up thinking that comes to fruition. I'll pass on it just because we don't know what kind of impact the weight cut will have had on the I believe Peruvian fighter. So that might be a little bit of an issue here, but I do believe Lozej wins here, and I think he gets it done kind of easily. But that guillotine, got to be very wary about it. All right, next up, Joey Hart coming in at -210, going up against Chris Mixan, who comes in at +170. Now, Joey Hart is coming off the Contender Series where he lost by split decision against Benjamin Bennett, who is also an LFA veteran. Close fight. I thought Bennett won, and I thought Bennett should have gotten the call up to the UFC. And something that kind of irritates me with the Contender Series and Dana White is he's always talking about, if a big underdog wins, they should get an automatic signing to the UFC, but he doesn't take into consideration when fights end up being a little bit boring than they should be, but due to the odds being as close as they were, especially in that Bennett and Hart fight, I think it was a pick'em if I'm not mistaken, obviously they're going to be more competitive and obviously going to be a lot harder to have a dominant performance that will be eye-catching enough for Dana White. So, very unfortunate for Benjamin Bennett there, but he did what he needed to do against Hart, utilizing a grapple-heavy approach, winning those first 2 rounds, surviving the 3rd round after Hart had a very solid round there, landing some big shots, but it was too little too late by then as Hart ended up winning the fight on the scorecards. Hart is a long, lanky striker that likes to utilize combinations, sticking his opponents from distance, and has some good sting on his shots that usually puts opponents away. As we saw in the Bennett fight, and as we saw in his previous professional loss, grappling is where opponents normally look to take advantage of him, and that's something that he needs to continue improving on so that he can operate in a space that he feels most comfortable, which is often the striking approach. If he can get to that and just keep fights standing, he could be a very dangerous prospect and still be a fighter that manages to find his way onto the UFC roster. He goes up against Chris Mixan, who I originally came across back in 2022, where he tried out for the PFL Challenger Series, came up big there, went to the PFL main roster, or at least in a feature belt capacity, and he won a split decision that not a lot of people thought he deserved to win. This guy's a striker that looks to utilize a lot of forward pressure and some big shots to put his opponents away. Decent cardio, I should say, but grappling is also where opponents have been able to take advantage of him. He suffered his first professional defeat in his last matchup as an opponent was able to utilize a grapple-heavy approach, specifically in that 3rd round, shut him down, and win that fight on the scorecards. But Mixan at his best utilizes combination striking, good straight shots down the pipe, and good footwork. Unfortunately for Mixan, I think he's up against it here in Hart, who I believe is the better striker. I think Hart also has a superior gas tank, and I think he'll be able to utilize his length a little bit better here, landing his straight shots down the pipe. Mixan is quite hittable, so that will be a big issue for him here. And I think Hart eventually lands that big shot to put Mixan away. The under 2.5, roughly around even money, not a bad spot. I expect both these guys to go out there and throw down in the striking realm, and I believe it's going to be Hart that ends up coming out on top. The line a little bit too wide from a money line perspective, as I believe that Hart's strength of schedule is a little bit of a question mark outside of his Dana White Contender Series matchup. This will likely be the best opponent that he's faced, but I still think he's the superior striker here, and I don't think Mixan has a good enough wrestling game to try to expose that side of Hart's game either. So I'm going to go Hart by knockout, and I'm considering a play on the under 2.5 around even money. All right, the first of 3 title fights goes down in the welterweight division as we have Anilto Antunes looking to bounce back from his Dana White Contender Series loss at the hands of Islam Dulatov. He goes up against Shamid Khan Magomedov, who's looking to build upon the knockout victory that he had over Alfonso Leyva back in October to successfully defend his interim title for the first time. If you guys remember, Magomedov actually won the interim title against Devin Smith. I believe that was early 2023. Late 2023 or early 2024. And then he got the call up to the Ultimate Fighter, ended up losing in the first round of matchups there to Omran Shaban. After a successful first round of using his grappling approach, he ended up getting caught in a choke and submitted in the second round of that matchup. As you would expect from Magomedov, strong wrestler, born in Dagestan, but doesn't train alongside the Nurmagomedovs, nor does he train out of American Kickboxing Academy, which is another hotbed for Dagestani wrestlers to go over to. He actually has set up shop in New Jersey at K Dojo, which is the gym that Khabib Nurmagomedov actually started his training at when he came over stateside. He started off in New Jersey, then he eventually went to AKA, but Magomedov is more than comfortable in terms of staying at New Jersey, and it's done more than wonders for him. Obviously, grappling and wrestling is what it comes to for him first. From there, it goes to improve striking, as we saw in his last matchup against Alfonso Leyva, landing a beautiful 1-2 down the pipe to hurt him initially, and then following up with another 1-2 to put him away. It's clear he's making improvements in the striking run, but he's going to be tested here against Anilto Antunes, who has tremendous knockout power and does a great job in terms of crashing the pocket and landing big shots to put his opponents away. He was the underdog in the fight where he ended up winning the welterweight title, knocking his opponent out in the first round. Unfortunately for him, he was up against a very tough Islam Dulatov on the Contender Series. Seeing Antunes come in as a plus 600 underdog, similar to what he comes into in this matchup, and, had glimpses of success, but for the most part, Dulatov eventually walked him down and put him away with a nasty elbow. Antunes could make things interesting here if he's able to stop a few of the early takedowns, but his speed and power down the pipe could cause Magomedov some issues. If Magomedov's not able to get him out of there within 2.5 rounds, Antunes' striking could potentially cause a lot of issues for Magomedov. I do think Magomedov will still win this matchup. I think his wrestling is just too much. I'd be surprised if he leans on his striking too much, especially considering the threat that's coming back his way, which is why I think we'll often see him land those takedowns and utilize that crushing top position. I don't know if he gets the finish, but we know he gets sloppy later on in matchups, just as we saw when he fought Bazmaran Mashrapov, I believe was the guy's name, a couple fights back. And that could allow spots for Antunes to actually land some big shots and maybe even find a knockout. So I'm staying away from the minus 800 on Magomedov. I'm considering the plus 550 on Antunes, even if it's just a small enough shot to win one unit here on Antunes. If he lands a big shot, that could cause Magomedov a lot of troubles. And again, this is all odds based here. I think Magomedov wins, but I think if you're going to bet aside even a little bit, Antunes might be the spot, especially at this big of a price line here. But I'm going to go, I guess, new undisputed LFA welterweight champion Shamid Khan Magomedov. All right, next up. Women's flyweight title on the line, unification bout here, as we have the actual champion Shannon Clark coming in at plus 175, going up against interim champion Cheyenne Bowers, who comes in at minus 215. Now, starting off on the Clark side, she was minus 950 last time around, where she made her Contender Series matchup against a relatively unknown, I believe, Colombian fighter. And one thing I was saying in the breakdown of that fight is it's hard to trust Clark as a big favorite considering some of the shortcomings she has in the striking realm. She's very robotic, and the majority of her wins come from her just bullying her opponents with her strength and her muscles, and that's what often causes her to win fights. She just gets a hold of her opponents, drags them to the ground, and crushes them from that top position, or just pushes them up against the cage and grinds on them for 15 minutes. We saw the exploits of her striking defense, we saw the issues in her striking defense come to fruition in the Contender Series matchup, where her opponent utilized a lot of good footwork, straight shots down the pipe, hurting and rocking Shannon Clark almost immediately, and then eventually following up, staying patient and getting that finish and getting Clark out of there with a nasty knockout shot. Again, Clark has a lot of improvements she still needs to make in the striking round because of how robotic and stiff she is, but if she can get a hold of her opponents, her strength is going to be very hard to deal with for a lot of fighters. And that's what Bowers is trying to improve on as well in terms of her striking, but she looks a little bit more fluid and a little bit more comfortable in the striking realm, throwing combinations, throwing kicks, utilizing good footwork, and utilizing speed to get in and out of the pocket. But just like Clark, Bowers does her best work when she's able to get fights to the ground, even if that means working off her back, where she's been able to pull off an armbar submission, just as we saw when she won the interim title last time around. The biggest win for a lot of people on her record would be her victory over Eileen Parra, obviously Alex Pereira's sister, and she did a great job of shutting her down. Now, both these women are quite physical. Clark obviously could be a little bit stronger here, but I believe Bowers is the better mixed martial artist. I think she's a better submission artist. I think she's the better striker. I think she has a better gas tank as well. But it's really going to come down to the strength between these two to dictate who's going to end up winning. I do think Bowers is the one that ends up coming out on top here, but I can't get too comfortable at minus 215. Again, Clark's strength could throw a wrench into Bowers' game here, but if Bowers can survive this, get into deeper waters, I think she could be a little bit more effective in the third, fourth, and fifth rounds. That also wouldn't surprise me if Bowers is able to lock up a submission at a certain point. But look for Bowers to be the one that lands more effective damage, working off the cage as Clark just looks to stifle her there and keep her in those bad positions. I think Bowers will get out of those spots. I think she'll be able to get back out into his distance, land some leg kicks, land some shots, maybe even get some good grappling moments of her own. We've seen Clark kind of struggle off her back in the past, and Bowers could obviously put her into those positions as well. So I'm going to go Bowers. Bowers by late finish, probably round 3, round 4, round 5, but minus 215, a little bit wide for me. I'm going to wait to see if this line comes down, by fight time. If we can get Bowers closer to minus 150, that's where I would be content with taking a shot on her. As of right now, I'd rather pass, watch it as a fan, but I'm going to go Bowers and Bowers with a late finish. And new undisputed LFA flyweight champion Cheyenne Bowers. All right, main event time here where we got Elijah Johns coming in as the actual LFA, featherweight champion, coming in at minus 150, going up against Lerryan Douglas, who comes in as the interim champion at plus 120. Now, Elijah Johns, the brother of UFC bantamweight Miles Johns, Johns was originally scheduled to rematch Javier Garcia last time out. Garcia was initially supposed to jump into the Ultimate Fighter, so he pulled out of that matchup. And then we saw Johns go out there and defeat Alfred Walker. Then he was scheduled to fight Lerryan Douglas, but then there was an issue with Johns. I think he came down with an illness on fight day or weigh-in day, and that fight was eventually postponed to this weekend. Johns obviously likes to utilize a wrestling-heavy approach. His striking is slowly getting better with his ability to crash the pocket with the power that he has and the explosivity, but he's trying to utilize that wrestling as effectively as possible so he can grind opponents out or look for that top position where he can get some finishes. 7 of his 10 wins have come by decision, while both losses on his record have also come by decision. Decent power in his hands, all about the takedown game. I just have questions about his gas tank, especially if he is forced to go 25 minutes. Douglas, on the other hand, after suffering a loss to Isaac Thompson, I believe almost 2 years ago now, or a year and a half ago, he was pretty much a middling fighter on the LFA roster and just playing a gatekeeper to the guys that are going to the UFC. But now he's won 3 straight fights, finishing all those opponents, has the LFA interim title around his waist. Very dangerous striker who throws in solid combinations, good leg kicks. His takedown defense is very much on point now, looking very much improved since we've seen earlier in his career. And when he is able to maintain his range and snuff out any attempts coming towards him, then he starts to get comfortable with his striking and starts getting into his flow of throwing combinations and really hurting his opponents. Nasty Muay Thai as well, and he has some sneaky submissions, but I think a lot of his success comes from that striking game. Last time around, like I said, he bided his time. Once he found the perfect shot, he opened up and found the finish. If he had a little bit more aggression and a little bit more assertiveness, he might be a better fighter. And I think the confidence of this winning streak that he's currently on is going to fuel that fire and that confidence of his, and that could allow him to go out there and actually get the win for this matchup. For me, it's all about if he can stop the takedowns the longer that this fight goes. I think he can survive the power of Johns. I think he can survive the first round and a half, 2 rounds of possibly getting grinded out. But once this fight really starts to pick it up in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds, I think Douglas will start to take over with his cardio advantage, his striking advantage, and his good enough defensive grappling that he should keep this fight upright and really do a lot of big work on Johns here. Seems like there has been action coming in on Douglas, and I absolutely agree with it. I am going to go with Douglas here, as I think he eventually picks apart Johns, eventually puts him away. The under 4.5, not a bad look either, in case Johns is the one that ends up landing the big shot and putting Douglas away. But I believe Douglas is the better, more equipped fighter for this matchup. Johns might be better off in a 3-round matchup of over 5 rounds. I think Douglas is much more dangerous, and he'll eventually provide a finish by the 4th round here as he starts stuffing the takedowns and getting to his striking. So give me Douglas and new undisputed LFA featherweight champion. Can't wait for it. Should be a good one. There you guys go. LFA 200 breakdowns for you guys. Again, these LFA and Cage Warrior breakdowns will always come the day before the fight card takes place. I'd like to wait until the weigh-ins are done just so I can see in case there are any fights that end up getting canceled, which seems to be a habit with a lot of these LFA and Cage Warriors fights. Thankfully, knock on wood, the fights I broke down for you guys right now were all the scheduled fights for the card, and none of them fell through due to the weigh-ins. But again, moving forward, just keep that in mind. Come to this channel the day before an LFA or Cage Warriors card, and I have you covered with full card breakdowns. If you want my official plays, track plays for this card, check out the MMA LOTN Lock of the Night Patreon page. Link for that in the description below. And let's try to get some cash in our pockets for this weekend. Good luck on all your action this weekend, folks, and I'll see you guys Monday for the UFC Saudi Arabia breakdown, where it's going to be Israel Adesanya going up against Nasruddin Imavov in the main event. Co-main event, Shara Magomedov going up against Michael Venom Page. Very, very fun card that I can't wait to break down for you guys. See you guys Monday. Peace.